A lease agreement is the written contract between landlord and tenant. One ordinary version is it gives the tenant the right to use the property for a defined time. The mechanism is that the document sets price, rules, responsibilities, and consequences. The practical effect is renting becomes risky when people sign without reading the details. The lease identifies the parties and property. Consider names, address, unit number, and contact details should be clear. The hidden part is that mistakes can create confusion later. The outcome is often that a contract should leave no doubt about who is responsible and which space is covered. The lease term sets the timeline. The pattern shows up when a lease may run month to month, 6 months, 1 year, or longer. The moving force is that the term affects flexibility and stability. The risk is that leaving early can create penalties if the contract does not allow it. Rent terms must be specific. In a daily situation, amount, due date, payment method, late fee, and grace period should be written. The link is that unclear payment rules create disputes. Once that link matters, tenants should know exactly when rent is considered late. Security deposit terms matter. The clearest example is the lease should explain amount, purpose, deductions, and return timing. The explanation starts with deposits often cause conflict at move-out. The consequences photos and written condition reports protect both sides. Maintenance responsibilities should be divided. For example, the landlord may handle major systems while the tenant handles cleanliness and minor care. The reason is that the exact division depends on the lease and local law. That can mean unclear responsibility delays repairs. Rules about pets, guests, smoking, and noise are enforceable when written. In real life, a tenant should not rely on a casual conversation if the lease says something else. The pressure comes from this. The written rule usually carries more weight. The result can be permission should be documented. Utilities and services need clarity. Think of water, electricity, internet, waste, parking, and building fees may be included or separate. The process works because the monthly rent can look affordable until extra costs appear. Over time, tenants should calculate the full monthly burden. Inspection rights should be understood. A simple case is this. Landlords may need access for repairs or emergencies, but notice rules often apply. The important driver is that privacy and property care must be balanced. That is why a lease should not leave access expectations vague. Renewal clauses shape the end of the term. You might see it when some leases renew automatically while others require a new agreement. What matters underneath is that missing a notice deadline can change options. If it is ignored, tenants should read renewal terms long before the final month. Early termination clauses are important. One ordinary version is job relocation, family change, or financial trouble can make moving necessary. The mechanism is that the lease may require notice, fees, or continued rent until a replacement tenant appears. The practical effect is knowing the exit cost prevents panic later. Subletting rules control whether another person can take over. Consider some leases ban it, while others require approval. The hidden part is that unauthorized subletting can violate the agreement. The outcome is often that tenants should ask before assuming they can transfer the space. Repair request procedures should be followed. The pattern shows up when email, portal, or written notice may be required. The moving force is that proper reporting creates a record. The risk is that verbal complaints are harder to prove when a problem grows. Default and eviction sections explain consequences. In a daily situation, missed rent, damage, illegal use, or repeated rule violations can trigger notices. The link is that legal steps vary by location. Once that link matters, the lease shows which behavior puts the tenancy at risk. Move-in condition should be documented. The clearest example is scratches, stains, appliance issues, and meter readings should be recorded early. The explanation starts with evidence protects the deposit. The consequence is a rushed move-in can become an expensive move-out argument. A lease can include local legal rights. For example, some rights exist even if the lease does not mention them. The reason is that a contract cannot always erase tenant protections. That can mean renters should understand both the lease and local housing rules. Negotiation is possible before signing. In real life, rent date, repairs, parking, paint, pets, and renewal terms may be discussed. The pressure comes from this. After signing, leverage usually drops. The result can be the best time to clarify is before money changes hands. Every promise should be written. Think of a landlord saying repairs will happen next week should put it in the agreement or an addendum. The process works because memory fades and staff can change. Over time, written terms turn promises into enforceable expectations. A lease works best as a practical map. A simple case is this. It tells both sides what to pay, maintain, avoid, report, and expect. The important driver is that the goal is not legal drama. That is why the goal is fewer surprises during the rental period. Lease agreement becomes clearer when it is tested in ordinary life. Take move-out notice clause. The point is visible in a move-out notice clause. The choice changes because lease agreements changes the pressure around the decision. What matters is the real consequence for the people involved, not just the clean definition of lease agreements. When the example is concrete, lease agreement stops sounding abstract and starts looking like something people deal with in real conversations, bills, deadlines, and relationships. Another useful angle is repair responsibility clause. A repair responsibility clause shows how one background condition can change the outcome before anyone calls it a big event. For a lease, the hidden force is the written promise that decides what happens when memory and expectations disagree. Once the clauses are clear, rent, repairs, guests, deposits, and notice periods become less uncertain. A lease matters because every small clause can become important later, especially when rent, repairs, guests, deposits, renewal, or early exit are disputed. A weak reading treats the lease as boring paperwork and misses the rules that matter during conflict. In the case of late fee rule, the final result may look simple from the outside, but the pressure was already building before anyone noticed it. Better judgment starts by reading the clause before the problem appears. A practical example is guest restriction. The practical point is not to memorize a slogan about lease agreements. The practical point is to treat the lease as the operating manual for the rental relationship. That contrast explains why the written clause matters more than what either side remembers later. Most confusion around lease agreement comes from missing that hidden exchange and focusing only on the surface event. A lease is not just paperwork. It is the rulebook for rent, repairs, deposits, notice, access, and what happens when expectations clash. A final example, renewal term, shows why this matters before the outcome becomes expensive, stressful, or emotionally charged. The strongest takeaway is to read the lease before a dispute forces you to. The practical point is to treat the lease as the operating manual for the rental relationship. Once those parts are visible, lease agreement becomes less mysterious and much easier to handle in daily life.